You know, once you've got your feet under the desk and you know that you're performing, what is the next role you want? If you are ambitious and you want to build your career, but don't leave it until you see the vacancy come up or you're tapped on the shoulder. You have to be thinking about that and behaving in a way that demonstrates your value the further up you go. And I think that's an easy mistake to make, that we're so busy doing our job well that we don't put our heads up and say, what should I be doing now to think about where I'll be in a year?
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in. Welcome to the first episode of 2025 of the Job Hunting Podcast. In this episode, I'm interviewing Anita Zimmer. She is one of the most experienced recruiters in Australia. This is the second time that I interview Anita, and if you're interested in the first time I interviewed her, I will have a link to that episode below. It's an interview from 4 years ago, but I think it's always great to get to know recruiters, to understand their mindset, the way that they think and that they make decisions, and how they view candidates like you. This time, Anita and I wanted to discuss internal candidates, both from the point of view of supporting internal candidates that want to apply for roles and progressing their careers through promotions, and that internal mobility that we always seek when we join an organization, but also from a point of view of the external candidate competing against an internal candidate and how they can take the advantage of being an external candidate and run with it. But why stop there? So we discuss many other topics as well, the high demand for roles and how we have an oversupply of senior executives looking for work. This was recorded at the end of 2024, but I am assuming that at the beginning of 2025, it will still be the same. There are lots of nuggets of wisdom and information that if you're looking for work, now or in the future, this episode is a must listen. I hope you enjoy it. You will see that I often refer to my group coaching program. That's because I had just wrapped up the group coaching program when I was having this conversation with Anita, but I'm opening up the doors again and starting a new group soon. So if you're interested in joining, if you're an experienced professional with over 10, hopefully 15 plus years of work experience, and you think you will enjoy being part of a group of other executives and professionals looking for work, then join my group coaching program. It's called Job Hunting Made Simple. There will be a link for you below to join the wait list, and we can discuss how it works in the coming weeks. I will keep you posted if you join the wait list. That's it for now. Enjoy the conversation with Anita. Keep in touch, and I'll see you next time. Remember, we had that conversation a while back about the internal candidate. And I did something that I often do with people, is that when I think it's a great idea, I then stop talking about it because I don't want to invest too much in talking about it when we were having lunch, and I want to have that conversation on the podcast. Yeah. So this is what I did, and I parked it for so long. And I think it's such a great topic to talk about the internal candidate. And one that I think is interesting for both the candidate, that's not internal, the candidate that's applying for the job, but also from a recruiter's perspective. I wonder, how it plays out for a recruiter that has been hired to act as an agent, but then there are internal candidates. Like it's all fascinating to me. Tell me about internal candidates. I mean, let's start sort of more generally. And then I can sort of dive into some questions for you.
I found some research papers many years ago, probably close to 20 years ago, that showed that internal candidates have a higher chance of success than external candidates when all things are equal. So if you or I have a similar background and capability and capacity, but I'm the internal and you're the external, then over time the internal will deliver a better result. So I think that's interesting, and that I looked it up again just in preparation for this podcast. And there's another one most recently, I think 2021, University of Minnesota, where they did the same thing, and they did a quantitative study on internal hires, and it showed that again. But
Mm,
that is when all things are being equal.
right.
Mm. Mm.
Do you think that when they hire recruiters, then they know that all things are not equal? That they need
Um,
external candidates because they lack the in-house knowledge to take on the role?
it can be that Renata, but they
Mm,
can also be sophisticated hirers, and they want to benchmark the internal candidate against the market. And
mm,
so they want to be absolutely sure that their internal capability is as strong or better than the external talent. And so
right.
either of those can exist. And what we appreciate is if a hiring client is completely upfront about that.
Yeah. And how do
So,
you think?
so
Now, you have probably seen great internal candidates competing with external candidates. Um, let's talk about each one individually. How do you think external candidates should approach the job application when they know that there are internal candidates in the mix? What's the best approach for them to have a higher success rate?
I would say it was a really interesting question, and I thought about that. I would say in my experience, so this is qualitative, not quantitative.
Yeah.
Very few external candidates ask if there is an internal candidate putting their hand up. So it also, of course, depends on the level. And because I work at the senior executive level, I can't vouch for those that are doing entry level or technically specific roles. But
Mhm.
when you are talking about upper management, very few people ask if there's an internal candidate. And I think that would be a really wise thing to do, not because you want to compete against that person, but it does give you an added sense of the research that you need to do to demonstrate your value.
Yeah, yeah, such a good point. In fact, when I was doing the group coaching just before we started chatting, one of the members of the group coaching, I asked them, "Do you have questions for Anita? I'm about to interview, this recruiter for to talk about internal candidates." That's exactly the question he asked. Can we ask recruiters? Is it appropriate to ask
It
recruiters if there
is.
is?
It is
Oh,
very appropriate, and
yeah.
I'm always completely transparent, and we'll share that information. Obviously, not by name, but yes, I'm very happy to share that.
Hmm.
And that brings me to another point, Renata,
Okay.
which which prompted me to think about this in line with this area of questioning. At board level appointments, when you're looking at a non-executive director appointment, there is definitely shared due diligence. You know,
Mm,
the non-executive director has to make sure that the governance structure, the performance of the board, is going to be matched to their capability and own integrity. But I've noticed where there's an employee relationship, i.e., there's a power imbalance, and I'd love to see high quality candidates who can back up their performance as superior performances do far more due diligence, because an organisation is really lucky to get a high performer hired. You know,
mhm,
the bell curve would tell us that most people are average, but the people that operate at the 90th percentile can deliver 3 or 4 times more value than the average performer. So if you are at the 90th percentile, absolutely make sure you are doing your due diligence before. Don't go cup in hand and say, "Well, thank you for the job." Make
mhm.
sure that you are joining an organisation that's going to match your capacity for performance.
That's an interesting. I hadn't thought of that at all. Are you thinking about this? You said that at the board level, though, right? So
No,
can we
I'm
sort of
saying at board level, directors are very clear about their own value and doing
okay?
their due diligence, and it's not like there's not a power imbalance. But I still
Hmm.
notice at an employee level, There is definitely a
Oh,
power imbalance between candidates and the employer. Mm.
yes. Yes. Oh gosh. Today is the third day that we're talking about power imbalance in the recruitment process. Because a few hours ago I was with a client and we were trying to find the best approach, and I said, look, it is a power game. There is no power imbalance because of your current situation, right? um, and in his case, he they will be lucky to have him. He can come in. The help will be, the employer will have his help if he joins, and not the help being the other way around. The employer will help
Yes.
him, right? So
Hmm.
that is, I use the word help a lot because it's easier for the clients to understand. And then the session after that, the power imbalance was completely different. The situation is,
Mm.
you cannot play your cards so strongly because the power imbalance is not
Mm.
for you, it's against you. So you have to be
Yes,
more
yes,
careful with the negotiation, right?
yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
And when it comes to going back to the internal candidate situation,
Mhm.
when somebody internally wants to apply for a job with an organization they work for, but they haven't been tapped on the shoulder, nobody told them apply,
Mhm.
how do they go about it? Because they feel really disenfranchised from the process, and they're not really sure that they will be seen as or perceived as a good candidate for the role.
Mm. Mm.
I often have clients ask me that question.
Mm. Um, but it's a very good question, and there's not one simple answer because it depends on the circumstance and the culture of their organisation, of their team, and the project they're working on, or particularly their responsibilities. So I'll put a sort of take a midline point and argue for the fact that I think openness and transparency in that process is very important. It's okay to let HR know if you're working in an enterprise scale organisation to say, I'm going to be applying for this role, and I would like your support, or I would like your feedback straight away that I don't waste my time. So
Yeah.
that would be one piece that I would go to, and I would also share it with the person if it's a senior executive reporting into a CEO. I would share it with the CEO. You need to have people on site and aware of what you're doing. There's no value in being furtive or discreet about it. It's not that you
Yes.
want to share it with 1,000 people, but with the people that matter and who are influencers, it's very important to be upfront with them about it on a
Mhm.
one-on-one confidential basis and seek their feedback, seek
Yes.
their support or otherwise. And if they're not going to support you, don't waste your time.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. I think that that's right. I think people understand the silence as being, let me self-select myself out of this, because if nobody tapped me on the shoulder, then it's not me. But because they haven't engaged anybody, they don't
Mhm.
actually, people don't actually know that they're interested.
Yeah.
And that leaves, a huge opportunity there that could be missed.
Yeah.
Yes, so many things have happened this week, and I feel like I could share them. I had a client that also thought about applying for an internal
Mm.
role, and she shared it in confidence with her manager, and the answer said, "Look, maybe it's not the right time," and then she immediately pulled out. She didn't insist, and moved on, and we have a different sort of pathway for her for 2025, because people are ambitious. And the fact that you don't the good thing about what happened to her was that she didn't see that as something negative. She just moved
Mhm.
on very quickly.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I thought that that was a really good
And I
behavior.
love seeing people putting their hands up for
Yeah.
promotions. And
Yeah.
so one of your questions is about one of the questions that comes up is, how should I prepare as an internal candidate?
Yes.
And my response is, don't leave it to the last minute. So
Mm-hmm.
so don't see the opportunity and say, oh, that's got my name on it. You
Mm-hmm.
need to be thinking about your next role the minute you take this current role. You
Yes.
know, once you've got your feet under the desk and you know that you're performing, what is the next role you want?
Hmm.
if you are ambitious and you want to build your career. But don't leave it until you see the vacancy come up or you're tapped on the shoulder. You have
Yes.
to be thinking about that and behaving in a way that demonstrates your value the further up you go.
Yeah.
And I think that's an easy mistake to make, that we're so busy doing our job well that we don't
Yes.
put our heads up and say, what should I be doing now to think about where I'll be in a year?
Yes. Oh, I love that. And having been coaching clients for over 5 years now, 10 years and maybe, I hardly ever see companies being proactive in even engaging with their employees about career advancement. It's usually the other way around,
Mm,
unfortunately, right? So
mm,
don't wait until people come to you and ask, what do you want?
mm, mm.
Tell them what you want whenever you have a chance. So yeah, that's very good
I've
feedback.
recently learned something, Renata, and which I have to reflect on my own misreading of a situation. When I read people's CVs, when I see promotions and rotations within the same organisation, I'm always really excited by those candidates because it did show me that they are performers. But what I've learned recently is that it's actually more enabled by the organisation than the person. So there are
Oh,
some organisations that really put their existing talent to the fore and are looking to progress their internal people for retention. And
mhm.
there are others who always think the shiny new thing is going to be better than what I've got. And
Mm.
they don't have a plan in place. So I would also, in terms of that, the value equation, if you're a mid career professional, I would be looking at organisations and their own practices in terms of internal promotions. And I would be looking into an organisation that can demonstrate it regularly and systematically does promotions and rotations for its own people. And I used to think it was up to the person, but it's not. It's actually the organisational systemic structures.
That is a good point. Yes, yes. And I think you're right now that I come to sort of think about, and I see that lots I don't know if that's what you're thinking of when you're mentioning this, but state government, I see a lot of people moving around, and very big global organizations tend
Yeah,
to do that
yeah,
as well. But if you work in an SME, for example, then you may need to do more of a proactive approach with your
you
manager.
do. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
much more so. Yeah.
Now, from a recruiter's perspective, right, when you're helping your clients assess external candidates with internal candidates, how can you compare? Because it's apples and oranges in the sense of how much you know about the person, right? And it can be good and bad because if you're an internal candidate and they already know a lot about you, they might see you in a certain way and fit into a certain, they have pigeonholed you already. But maybe they're already, completely in love with your performance, and it's hard even for them to acknowledge external candidates. So how do you manage that situation as a recruiter working with them?
Renata, I compare apples and apples. I take no notice of an internal candidate's existing relationship with the hiring organisation because that's their employer. I am.
Mm,
We've tried to take the art out of recruitment and make it more analytical. And so our structured interview process is the same for everybody that we interview for a role, and it's tailored to that role. So we're looking for their capacity and capability and
mm,
experience. But however, when it comes to the internal interview panel or the hiring manager, that's where it gets trickier. And so I can give counsel to some internal candidates about some things that I've seen where the good quality internal candidate has fallen down. And that is, as you've said, we know each other as colleagues, warts and all,
yeah.
whereas the external candidate's still got that veneer of beauty
Mm,
and marble and the
yes.
magic sheen.
Mhm.
Give them 2 years, they'll have the same tarnished look as most of us. That's the nature of life.
Yeah.
But the other pitfall for internal candidates is that they are known they are known in a particular role. And I have been surprised when I've sat in on panels to observe how little a hiring organisation knows about their own internal talent. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so somebody might be, um, I don't know, deputy finance director, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this role. But on that hiring panel, nobody knows that in fact in a previous two roles they did this and this and that, which is directly related to what needs to be done in the future for this organisation. So we have to articulate our relevance and our broader experience even within our own organisation. And I think practicing the narrative around that is really important, and using somebody like you, Renata, or a trusted friend, colleague, family member to help build out that narrative so that
Yeah.
you can present yourself as a little bit of that shiny bauble. What you know about me is this, but what you may not know is that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to share with you why, you know, Renata, I've got, everything that's required for this role. You do have to be fairly off the front foot.
And Anita, I'm thinking about a research that you shared, I think it was a couple of years ago, about how professionals that change jobs every few years earn more and progress more rapidly. I mean, there's controversy about that, but I actually do believe that because of what you just said about you not really knowing about your internal candidates and not knowing about how talented they are or how ambitious they are, you haven't really measured or discussed with them career progression. So sometimes it's easier to do the sideways moves to the top than to be an internal candidate.
Yeah, yeah. But be careful that you don't move every 2 years too often
Okay.
because it starts to look a bit suspect to me.
Okay.
You can do that in the 1 and 2 year stays in your 20s, maybe up to your mid 30s, is palatable.
Mm-hmm.
But then we really start putting a magnifying glass to that, saying, "What's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the year 3, 4, 5 that get harder. And so I
Mm-hmm.
want to know that you're going to deliver through good times and bad, and you can see things through, and you can develop teams, and you can lead and contribute. Whereas everybody forgives most people the first 12 months to really settle in and get their hand around a project or a role.
Yeah.
And the second year is still quite fresh. It's really onward from that. So if I'm seeing that people are moving every 2 years all the time, unless you're a contractor, which is an outsourced service,
Yeah.
it's not
I
a
was going
long-term
to
career.
say, yeah, I was going to say here in Australia, there's a lot of that going on since the pandemic, a lot of short term contracts. It's not like the executives I work with don't want the permanent roles, it's that the roles aren't permanent. They are 12-month contracts and that get extended, for a year or two and then it ends. Um, and that's been happening a lot. Do you see that in the resumes that you receive? And is that something you discuss with the candidates?
The the contract nature of work, just as a not to alarm your listeners and viewers, Renata, but we're seeing more applications for roles now than we've seen since the GFC. So
Yeah.
it's telling us something. So the unemployment data for Australia, I'm just talking about the Australian situation here,
Hmm.
is probably more reflective of lower level roles, i.e., um, home services, care, hospitality. There is virtual full employment because I don't think the middle management and above are registering for job seeker.
Yes.
We've got a lot of people who've got their own consulting businesses on their CVs, which is a
Hmm.
career gap really by another name because
Hmm.
it's up 6 or 12 months. I think there's a tightening of belts in corporate land, and I think it's an interesting time. We can't quite make sense of it at the moment because the government data doesn't correlate with what we're seeing anecdotally.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. No, we discussed that a lot in my group coaching and private coaching as well, because not only we don't see it in the data, but it's not spoken of.
No,
Everybody's
that's
quiet
right.
about
That's right.
it. So
Well,
people come to me feeling, what's going on? I'm applying,
mm,
and I don't get, I don't hear back, or I interview and I don't get the jobs. And I'm like, that's because there's a lot of people just like you, just as qualified as you, applying for jobs. And
there
it's
are.
happening.
It's
Yeah.
very competitive at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
In my experience, and I know that a lot of my listeners are from America, it's actually worse over there than here. I think now we're
Is it?
recording this as we find the results of the US election. And regardless of how you voted, it's better to know than to not know. And I think once the results are in,
Mhm.
companies will start to then develop plans for
That's
2025.
yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's good that we
And I would
mentioned.
always urge people. It is,
Go ahead.
and I've just mentioned something that's just on my mind at the moment. We're running a significant deputy CEO level role for a large government enterprise, and we had over 200 applications for that role, as well as running a concurrent talent mapping and search process. And this was a lot about stakeholder management and partnerships and relationships. And of the my name and number was on every one of those ads. And of those 200 people, probably only 20 of them contacted me directly. Now,
Really?
I'm not looking for more work, but that told me a lot about the quality of those other 180 people. Because if you're going to be in a business where you've got to make stakeholder engagement a critical success factor, wouldn't you start by contacting me?
I cannot tell you how many people don't know the rules of the game, right? This
Ah,
competition has a set of unwritten rules. They are unwritten rules. They're not sort of out there explained. Some recruiters have a website, a landing page where they sort of, but if that isn't anywhere, and they don't understand that that is a prerequisite to be considered a great candidate. And it's so interesting, but we go through there are lots of things that need to be done. They just don't know the order of how to do them. So many of them think that you should apply first and then contact. Why would you do that? But it's, once you explain, then they get it. But you would be surprised how many high quality professionals just don't understand that the order of things. But I think there's also a generational issue as well, that we might be seeing in the future, is that there is a new generation of professionals that just don't know how to use the phone. They just do not call. If I'm working with people in their mid 30s, I have to insist with them. And part of my
Yeah.
coaching is sometimes just
And so,
calling them.
do you agree with that, Renata? That- yeah. So,
Yeah.
are you comfortable at providing that advice to your clients?
100% on this podcast. Hundreds of times I have told them you have to call, but the
Okay.
behind my client's firewall, my IP, and what I teach them is the order of things, how to play this game and what to do at every stage, from the moment you fall in love with a position. But frankly, Anita, and I've learned this from Jeff Slade, and then I've had that validated by other recruiters. These days, you need to be on LinkedIn, like fully fledged, with a profile and an activity that matches your reputation and your experience. Not just any type of LinkedIn
Yes.
profile, but one that is appropriate for your area of expertise and in an activity that matches that as well. Because I find that Slade Group and other recruiters are finding the candidates even before the candidates find the jobs. So LinkedIn becomes essential for that. And many people
Yeah.
still don't get it.
And Renata, that also goes back to your point about what should internal candidates do. That is another great way of demonstrating your more advanced talents or connections or interests in the future roles that you want. It's
Yes.
LinkedIn is such a fabulous tool for that, so that you create, um, you know, a reference site for yourself, so that if somebody looks at it, they get it. It's not just Renata doing this; it's also Renata commenting on that, attending that, focusing on that, etc. Mm.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely right. If you are an internal candidate and you have been with an organization for over 3 years, 4 years, it's very likely you've become lazy on LinkedIn. You've taken it for
Yep.
granted, and now it's time to reconnect with people and make sure that you're updating your LinkedIn. I recently did a presentation at Slate Group, and 30 people came, and it was really awesome conversation that we had there. It was overbooked. I think we didn't expect so many people to come. But immediately after that, I really did expect more people to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I didn't see that happening. And I think that that's very common, for people to come attend, like what they see, but then forget to do the rest of the
Yeah.
nurturing
Yeah.
of connections, which is
Mm.
connect with them on LinkedIn, send a
Mm.
message, try to
Mm.
engage somewhat. So it may not be high priority because
Yeah.
the rat race of work takes over, and I understand that. But for your future career, it might be
Mm.
important to nurture those relationships whenever
It
possible.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you make another really good point that after 3 or 4 years, we can become a bit complacent about
Mm,
LinkedIn, but also about networking. And I do absolutely think you have to maintain your networks and
mm,
attend seminars, conferences, you know, forums, etc., and be known and be seen. And also
mm,
keep yourself up to date, because what you learn on the job is one thing, but there's all this additional learning that you'll find outside, sector
mm,
wide and more broadly.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. I have another question for you that came from the group coaching today, Anita. So that's a new one. Sorry about that. But I thought it was a great one. One of my clients asked, "How do you close the deal with a panel, a selection panel, when you know that you're not the ideal candidate for the role?" Now, let me explain this a little bit, right? Because when I'm working with
Please.
clients,
Yep.
when I'm working with clients, we try to analyze what type of candidate we are compared to the
Hmm.
competition, right? So the ideal candidate would be somebody that comes from the same industry, or an internal candidate, somebody that has more of a linear career, because the way that I explain to them is decision makers are usually conservative, even when they don't want to be. They might, cast a wide net, and then they tend to recruit more conservatively towards the end. In this case, I know that the candidate was aware that one other candidate was from the same industry and had the background that pretty much was a great fit for the organization, but she was in the final two with this person, right? So she wanted
Hmm.
to get your views on, if you were like the odd one out, the out of the box candidate, the dark horse,
Hmm.
how do you expand your chances of success against a candidate that
Mm.
seems more
Great
like a right
question.
fit?
Now that
Is
I
there
understand it a
a
bit
chance?
better, thank you.
Is there a chance for this
I
client or not?
understand it now.
Yeah.
There is, absolutely there is. Number
Mm,
one, I would definitely urge that person and anybody to really do a lot of research on the organisation that they wish to join,
okay.
because knowing what their future plans are, and I'm always super impressed by candidates who can feed back to me information about an annual report, about a strategy plan, about a vision, about the stock market price, whatever it is, about their challenges, because that's where you're going to find the gold. And so this is my little bit about IP, Renata, and I'm sharing this with all your people because I've watched so many panels make decisions. So for that person, the way that I would articulate it, perhaps in different words, is if they want to close off the interview or make their statement, having done their research and knowing what the vaguely knowing what the future for that organisation looks like, it's mitigating the risk of hiring them. So, panel, I know you see that I could be a risk because XXX, but the reason why I don't think that is a real risk is because why. And the reward of hiring me, spell it out for them. Don't expect them to join the dots for you. Spell it out for them. The reward of hiring me is ABC. And I understand your challenges, I understand the opportunities, and I have delivered X, so you're mitigating the risk. I've done this before, or I have delivered. Provide the evidence to show it's a compelling argument.
Yeah.
But no matter what question that panel is asking you, in the back of their head, they are asking themselves, what's the risk of hiring Renata? What's the reward of hiring Renata? They're just the two counterbalances. So think about that.
That's such a good point. I love that, the risk mitigation. I think if you have that in mind, I think it's the best thing to do in terms of helping you prepare and being mindfully in there in the room. One of other thing that I find very difficult for professionals to understand is the whole networking during the recruitment process with the organization. Have you noticed this, especially in this high anxiety year that,
Oh,
2024 has been so hard?
there, for an external or an internal candidate, do you mean, Renata?
For an external candidate, well, internal as well. I think that I haven't thought of
Don't
that.
do it.
Don't do it. Yeah, that's what I think too.
Mm, don't do it.
Because they're trying so hard
Mm,
to get
mm-hmm,
the
mm,
handle on the situation
mm,
elevate their chances that they use LinkedIn in a way that's quite inappropriate.
mm, mm. I
And
agree.
that also undermines the recruiter who is the intermediary,
It
right?
does. It
Yeah.
does.
So can
And
you
I've
can you
had
think
experience of that recently. I've had the experience of that recently on one particular role,
can
and
you give
it's
examples
a
of
bad look.
things the bad look? Yeah. Can you give examples of things that you shouldn't do if you are going through a recruitment process?
Oh, you know, calling the chair and saying, "Can you tell you know,
Yeah.
tell them that I'm a good bloke," or like I just seriously, it's
Yeah.
it's as blatant as that. It just looks desperate,
Mm,
and it's inappropriate because the the hiring organisation, and for your American
mm,
um, listeners and viewers, the Aussie term is he's a good bloke. Well, a good bloke isn't going to cut it. I'm after performance and evidence and capability
yeah.
and leadership and integrity. It's not because I know John, it's because I
Mm,
can actually perform this task at an extremely high level.
yeah. And the other situation is when you know who is going to be in the selection panel, right? So
So, say that
correct me
again,
if
sorry,
I'm wrong.
Renata.
The other situation is when you are a candidate and you know who is in the selection
Mm-hmm,
panel. You know somebody in the selection
mm-hmm,
panel. My advice to my clients when that happens is to, well, if you know them and you are applying for the role, let them know. Because if there is any conflict of interest, they need to stand out.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah?
And I think raising that with an integrity lens is a really smart move too. Just letting you know that I have my name down for
Yes.
this role and you might be meeting me. I'll leave it with you as to whether that's a problem for you or not. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And that's very appropriate.
Yeah. Um,
Mm.
can we think of anything else that we need to discuss about internal candidates today? Have we left anything out?
Let me have a look.
Because we had a list of questions, but I feel like we've addressed them
Yeah,
somehow.
I think we've covered a lot, haven't we?
We have. Can we
The
talk
net
about
we've discussed the networking. You know we've discussed the fact also that the organisations that have a pattern of doing promotions and rotations have come to the fore as I used to really honestly think it was the people that got themselves ahead, but it's the organisation that's going to be backing internal hires more so than the person who's proven their ability. My one point for your clients, Renata, is that if you are going to be going for a role that's a step up above where you are, don't do so if you don't think you've got the capacity or capability to really deliver. If it's premature, don't do it. And when I say where do you sit on that bell curve of performance, be brutally objective about your own assessment of your own performance. You know, if you were to line yourself up with the 100 top performers in the organisation, where would you be? Do you know you're number one, or do you know you're sort of lagging in the bottom 50th percentile? So don't get ahead of yourself because it'll only bring you undone.
Yeah, that's a good point. I usually don't deal with that with my clients. I usually have trouble convincing them to accept that they've been tapped on the shoulder. Like when they have been told, we want you to apply for this role. We think you're a good candidate. I kid you not. I have many clients saying, "Oh, I don't feel ready. I don't understand why, I don't think I'm qualified yet." I'm like, but if they have seen it in you, why can't you see it yourself?
Yes.
People are afraid of the extra responsibility as well. They
Okay.
think a more senior role is, might be harder for them. I actually think the harder part of career progression is the middle. That sandwich in the
Mm,
middle is actually
mm.
where the workhorses are. And it's
Yes,
also
it's very much.
where redundancies happen. So I'm like, no, just move up a little bit more, and you actually be a bit more relieved. But yeah, usually I'm trying to convince people that they're ready.
Yeah, and Renata, I love those people who don't think they're ready and yet everybody else thinks they are, because
Yeah.
there's a modesty about their own performance and yet they are high performers. So that's I would much rather have the substance than the window dressing, and I love that. And when I hear about those people, they're gold. So
Wow.
if somebody does tap you on the shoulder, step up. And even if you don't get the role, the process itself will be like a professional development opportunity. So
Mm,
grab it. I think it's a
yeah.
wonderful, wonderful thing to do.
Yeah. You're right. I
Mm.
think what we're doing here is, a great conversation. It will come out early in 2025, this episode. I think it will be a much better year, both for the internal candidates, but mostly for those external candidates that are waiting for opportunities to arise. Um, do you have any final advice or maybe trends that you're expecting to see in 2025? What is it that as recruiters we expect to see in the months ahead? I mean, there's a slowdown that's obviously going to happen during Christmas and New Year.
Mm.
Obviously, is it as obvious as I think it is?
Yeah. I'm going to finish off with a little anecdote, Renata,
Okay.
um, by, by somebody I know who's older than I am, who has a grandson who was at university working, got a job at McDonald's. And this was an a retired CEO, and he told his grandson, just default to yes. You know, get to work quarter of an hour early, get yourself ready, stay quarter of an hour late, clean up, put your hand up. When somebody says, do you want to do, yes. And I think that carries through your career. I know people may argue about that. I can't tell you how much of a career defining mindset that is.
Hmm.
When you go above and beyond, when you're ready, when you want to do more, when you say yes, it will pay off in bucket loads. And really, our careers are our wealth creation opportunities. So it's not for employees. It's not the employer versus the employee. It's about the employee making the most of every opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
it's a good note to end with. Anita, thank you so much. It's always lovely to talk to you.
Me too.
We should do more of these chats here on the podcast, although I really do love catching up with you for lunch. So when I'm back in Melbourne, I'll do that as well.
Lovely. So lovely to see you, Anata.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.